For much of my life in politics, I've been closely associated with the issues of foreign affairs and defence. But there was another great passion which brought me into politics. A passion perhaps not particularly detailed, but a reflection of a very general sense which I possess, and a general sense enlarged, I suppose, occasioned by the fact that in my own life I've never lacked opportunity. I've often lacked application, but I've never lacked opportunity. And when I took on the responsibilities of the leadership of the Liberal Democrats, it seemed to me that opportunity was something of which I had direct experience, and it was something which was sadly lacking in Great Britain today. This is a society in which your future is determined not by your skills and commitment, but far too often by where you were born and who your parents were. I want Britain not only to be a society of opportunity, but to be a country where those who cannot work or whose earnings are limited are given proper financial support and assistance to do better. Indeed, I want a society with ladders to climb up and a strong safety net to catch those who would otherwise fall. And that safety net cannot be immovable. It needs to move upwards as national income and prosperity increase. After the Second World War, as armies were demobilized, people came back to civilian life. Conditions in Britain improved under the great reforming Labour government of Clement Attlee. There was a National Health Service, more and better schooling, more resources with which to bolster the welfare state, and relative poverty was in decline. And the distribution of income and wealth became less unequal. There were still enormous gaps in opportunities and outcomes, but the evidence appeared to be that these were narrowing. But by the 1960s and the 1970s, there were already warning signs for the future. Increasing family breakup, which undermined the stability that young people needed. And perhaps equally powerful, Britain's relative economic decline, which threatened to choke off the resources needed to fight poverty. And then came the long period of Conservative government after 1979. During that period, wealth and income inequality rose. Relative child poverty tripled, with over 1 child in 3 in Britain affected. And soaring unemployment created a lost generation of people who find themselves by middle age and through no fault of their own on the economic scrap heap. The 1980s, in truth, was a decade which turned back the clock of progress in reducing inequalities. Not only did the rich become richer, but the poor became poorer in absolute terms, a development not seen since before that Second World War. In a place of opportunity for all, there was advocated a new freedom from social responsibilities, a new opportunity for the affluent few to opt out of their obligations to society. And opportunity Britain became opt-out Britain. In 1997, we can all remember that May Day morning, the hopes were so high, were they not? It really did seem, in the words of the song, as if things and Britain could only get better. And of course, in some respects it has. Pensioner poverty and child poverty have both been reduced, largely through the use of means-tested benefits. Unemployment is lower. A lot of money has been spent on improving schools and on early years education. There has been some investment in renewing the existing social housing stock. Targets have been set to reduce child poverty. Someone said to me the other day, if targets were a measure of good governance, then Britain would be in the world. But in many other respects, welfare reform and action to improve opportunity have been disappointments in Labour's last 10 years. Overall income inequality is no better than it was under the Tories. Wealth inequality is worse. And relative poverty levels are still well above those in many developed countries. One factor which widens inequality is Britain's openness to the world economy, an openness we cannot deny or prevent. Britain's success in attracting international investment, particularly the success of the city, has led to those at the top end of the scale being paid phenomenal amounts by the standards of the average worker or pensioner, and the annual Christmas bonuses will no doubt bear eloquent testimony to that. The extraordinary property boom has helped to widen wealth inequality. Well, my response and the response of my party is that we cannot turn our back on the challenge of globalization. We must learn to live with it. We have a tax system which still hits the poorest hardest, not least through the unfair and burdensome council tax system. Levels of social mobility seem to be falling rather than rising, and there is too little affordable housing. If you doubt that, ask any constituency MP how many people come to visit our surgeries, but sometimes on almost a regular weekly basis, desperate for proper housing. The welfare safety net is set at a very low level in Britain, with one of the meanest state pensions in the developed world, and other benefits shrinking fast in relation to average earnings. And the reliance on means-tested benefits is trapping more and more people in dependency. The price which is being paid for keeping down public expenditure commitments by shunning universal benefits is that the effective tax rates being faced by those on low incomes are often as high as 60, 70, 80, or even 90%. And for savers, the effect of means testing is that some people who save in the new personal pension accounts could lose up to 85 pence in every pound invested. The strategy of means testing, therefore, is delivering first entrenched poverty through a failure to take up benefit entitlement. Second, low private saving through the undermining of incentives. Third, waste through endemic fraud. And fourth, financial instability through the problems with tax credit overpayments. And fifth, family problems through penalising those who live together. The Chancellor's strategy of mass means testing is undermining work, undermining saving, and undermining families. I do not believe that it is sustainable. It risks trapping millions of people in a dependency culture. We should be giving people an education and a chance. Instead, we give them a benefit book and a 30-page claim form. And unless we create a society where the state assists people to improve themselves, we will never be able to eliminate poverty. Well, what are the alternatives? David Cameron, keen to change the image of the Conservative Party, is now accepting the need to think of poverty in relative terms. And he has a new idea. He calls it rolling forward the frontiers of society. Now, no genuine liberal is going to disagree with the proposition that the voluntary and private sectors should have an important part to play in tackling poverty and deprivation. And no genuine liberal is going to recoil for one moment from local solutions. Nor do I disagree with the proposition that we need to pay more attention to tackling the causes of poverty. But rolling forward the frontiers of society is less a big idea for the future than a small idea from the past. Conservatives have always believed in charitable and voluntary action rather than government action. But it was the very inadequacy of these voluntary solutions that caused the state to assume a greater role and responsibility. And in countries like the United States, we see today the consequences for those in the bottom quarter of society of having to rely on charitable handouts rather than on a modern and reformed state welfare system. The big idea is nothing new. It is, in my judgment, an echo of the Victorian values and the charity-driven conservatism of the 19th century. That is the past and not the future. I believe it is disingenuous to pretend you can cut relative poverty levels without tackling the hard policy issues on taxation, on affordable housing, on benefit levels, and on education and skills. So how then should our Liberal Democrat approach differ from the dependency state or the do-little society? The Liberal Democrat should be the voice for those disadvantaged by the Conservatives and let down by Labour. And I intend to take the fight against poverty and inequality to the government. I'm determined that our next general election manifesto will be the boldest ever in its commitments to challenge the causes and effects of inequality of opportunity in our society. For we must be a party not only of the affluent, or indeed the compassionate middle class, but also of those whose lives are less financially secure. Our message must resonate with those in work who struggle to make ends meet, and those out of work who are seeking to lift themselves out of poverty. But the government wedded to dependency, and the Conservatives to compassionate inactivity, the Liberal Democrats are the only party that can effectively stand up for the poor and the disadvantaged. Well, let's be clear and to be fair. Labour has had the right aspirations, but the wrong policies. We need policies that marry the compassion of social liberalism with the dynamism of economic liberalism. We need a Britain that gives more security and opportunity to every citizen without trapping them in dependency. We need a Britain in which the power of the state is used for liberation, not limitation. And I want to give every person a decent education, not a 30-page form to fill out. I want the Liberal Democrats to stand up for families let down by the complexity and unfairness of the tax credit system. I want the Liberal Democrats to stand up for children for whom the quality of schooling has stood still or even in some cases declined under this government. And I want the Liberal Democrats to stand up for those who've been failed by this government's neglect of affordable housing. We should champion the needs of children so that we can end child poverty. We should dismantle the barriers that make it difficult for those who seek to go back to work. And all of this, I'm sure you have already reached this conclusion, will require extra financial resources. And we will meet new commitments through our current review of expenditure priorities being carried out by my shadow Treasury colleagues, which will switch £15 billion per annum from areas of current government expenditure to our priorities. And you will not be surprised to hear me say that underlying all of these welfare reforms must be the principles set out by Beveridge over 60 years ago, but as relevant today as they were then. In his report of 1942, Beveridge argued, the state in organising security should not stifle incentive, opportunity, responsibility in establishing a national minimum. It should leave room and encouragement for voluntary action by each individual to provide more than the minimum for himself and his family. Beveridge was concerned that welfare policies should not, to use his word, infantilise citizens by encouraging dependency. The combined effect of the policies of Labour and Conservative has created a system that undermines those objectives. Today, the challenge for Liberals is to put incentive, responsibility and opportunity centre stage. Let me turn to the issue then of child poverty. I want to ensure that every young person has the chance to succeed. Under the last government, Britain became the child poverty capital of Europe, a national disgrace and an international embarrassment. It's true, under this government there's been a reduction in child poverty, but not enough. And that's why I want the Liberal Democrats to put the eradication of child poverty at the centre of our priorities. And that's why I can announce today that the Liberal Democrats are committed to the United Kingdom goal of ending child poverty by 2020. But we must do more than that, because our ambition is not simply to deliver dependency, but opportunity. So the ending of child poverty by 2020 must go alongside tackling the educational failures that in too many cases lead to a lack of aspiration and a failure to achieve. And that's why I have two additional ambitions alongside the commitment to eliminate child poverty by 2020. Just as we want to get to the lowest levels of child poverty in Europe, I believe we should aim to improve our children's basic literacy and numeracy skills so that they are on the highest levels in Europe by that date, 2020. And we need to help more people who want independence and dignity through employment and not being reliant on welfare dependency. And that is why we will set an additional goal for 2020, aiming to halve the number of people claiming benefit on the grounds of incapacity by 2020, giving 1.3 million people a better chance. Currently, we are among Europe's worst performers in this area. By 2020, I want us to be among the best. That is an illustration of that. It's not aspirations, but policies which are crucial. It is substance which counts and not symbolism. And so next year, in September, at our party conference, the Liberal Democrat Policy Group, led by Liz Barker and David Laws, already working, will report on policies to tackle poverty, social exclusion and inequality of opportunity. But today, I want to set out some signposts about the types of reform which we are considering, and upon which Liz Barker and David Laws will be taking evidence from experts in the field. Some of you may actually be in this room, ensuring that the decisions we come to are the best informed that we can manage. Let me start with the issue of security and incentives, of strengthening the welfare safety net and giving people opportunities to work and save. The existing benefit system is a mess. The original contributory principle has been substantially undermined. If you work all your life, you now get a basic state pension which is over 25% lower than if you had not worked at all. In many cases, 30 or 40% of benefits go unclaimed. It's no wonder that take-up rates are so low. You need a PhD in economics to understand how tax credits work. And the practical reality of the inadequacy of the mechanism for tax credits is demonstrated once again in the surgeries of every member of Parliament. On a weekly basis, people finding themselves allowed money and then finding at the end of the year substantial sums being sought to be paid back, often to their intense financial embarrassment, but equally to their very considerable emotional distress. Government incompetence in administering tax credits means that every year almost 2 million low-income earners have been driven further into poverty and debt by being overpaid tax credits. Now today there are over 50 separate benefits. Each has its own tapers, tests and qualifying criteria. This has almost doubled since the 1970s. It is up from just 7 benefits when the welfare state was founded in the post-war era. And it's not only that there are so many different benefits, there are around 250 different benefit rates as well. The system is complex, almost beyond understanding. The safety net is not only riddled with holes, but it is set too close to the ground. For the last quarter of a century, most benefits have been uprated only by the level of price increases. So people relying on these benefits are getting poorer and poorer in relation to the rest of society. Job seekers' allowance has shrunk from almost 25% of average earnings to little more than 10% in 30 years. Child benefit for second and subsequent children is lower now in real terms than it was in 1988. And of course we know that the benefit system includes perverse and undesirable incentives. Today's tax credit system penalises people who are married or live together. and gives less help per person to two-parent families than to lone-parent families. As a consequence, we now have the Alice in Wonderland position of more people claiming tax credits as lone parents than there are lone parents. It is surely madness to design a tax and benefit system which penalises those who wish to live together, which undermines the effort to cut child poverty. So I'm asking the working group that I've referred to look at three changes in this area. First, just as we propose simplifying taxation, why can't we make benefits and tax credits simpler while dramatically reducing the number of benefits? We will set an objective to cut 50 benefits to 25, as there were 30 years ago. On pensions, of course, we cannot make any commitment to higher public spending, which cannot clearly be met by cuts elsewhere. But within these constraints, within that £15 billion I've already referred to, we should promote the concept of a good, non-means tested citizens' pension. And as a first step, we want the restoration of the link between pensions and earnings. This will be financed in the long term by the recognition of the need for a later pension age and less extravagant public sector pension commitments. Pensioners cannot be allowed to fall further and further behind. And we should surely get rid of pension credit, the state second pension, the ludicrous 25 pence extra at the age of 80, and just pay people a decent state pension with less means testing and real incentives for saving. We should look too at a single working age benefit, merging job seekers allowance and incapacity benefit. Extra help for disabled people should be delivered through a revised DLA, not a benefit linked to employment status. And without council tax, we can get rid of the bureaucratic nightmare of council tax benefit. And surely too, we must simplify tax credits, returning to fixed awards that recognise that what those on low incomes need most is stability, and certainly not the roller coaster of overpayment and then debt and then repayment. And the second challenge is to provide a stronger safety net for everyone without more means testing. The strategy of means testing has surely reached its limits. I think even the Chancellor has recognised that now on pensions. Child benefit has fallen significantly behind earnings growth since 1979. For second and subsequent children, it shrunk by a sixth compared with average earnings in the last 15 years alone. Emphasising what I said earlier about our approach to spending commitments, I believe the best way forward is through strengthening non-means tested child benefit. So we should consider raising the amount given to all eligible children to the same level granted for the first child. And that, at a cost of £1.7 billion, would move 300,000 children out of poverty. And if we are to remove the disincentives for couples to stay together from the tax credit system, we could introduce a couple's premium into child tax credit, ending the bias against two-parent families while cutting child poverty at the same time. This is not about the state telling people how to live their lives, but it's about removing the financial penalty that low-income parents incur if they choose to stay together. And third, instead of allowing benefits to wither away in relation to average earnings, we need at least once in every Parliament to hold a review of benefit levels set against published objectives for poverty reduction. This must be in the context of public spending discipline and of people of working age accepting their responsibilities to seek employment. Let me talk about welfare into work. Families with no one in work are much more likely to be families with children growing up in poverty. Work is the best route out of poverty. The government often boasts about the numbers of people in work, but the truth is that the employment rate is basically unchanged over the past 30 years. Indeed, it is now lower for men than it was 30 years ago. And one of the biggest failures of this government and its predecessors is that there are still 2.7 million people on incapacity-related benefits. Under the Chancellor's strategy of mass means testing, over 1.7 million people face higher effective tax rates than the rich will ever now pay, as I've said, 60, 70, 80 or even 90%. This is absurd. Tax credits have made it worthwhile for many to work, but the system now traps people in low-income jobs because even small to medium increases in their salaries result in a tax credit cut rather than a real rise in their take-home pay. And this inevitably acts as a ball and chain on people's ambition. It deepens the dependency culture and it stifles inspiration. So that is why I believe we should set an initial target of halving the number of people facing effective tax rates of more than 60%, cutting the present totals by more than 800,000. But work incentives are not the only problem. There are millions of people who want to work but who cannot. Some have illnesses, some lack skills, some, yes, are drug dependent, and they need help to get employment. Under Mrs. Thatcher's government, these people were often simply written off. And under Labour, they'd be left in limbo. Well, the Secretary of State had something to say about that limbo yesterday. Some want to work, but the benefit rules make it impossible. Some want to work, but they need help with childcare. Many of these people need specialist help to get back to work, but no such help is on offer. And with arbitrary cuts in the Department of Work and Pension staff budgets, that lack of help will remain a serious problem. What does it say about this Britain? That it's easier to get money from the government to stay out of work than to get the help needed to get back into it. Low employment rates among the disabled are a disgrace and should be an affront to a civilized society. We will set a 2020 goal of reducing those out of work through incapacity by 50%, from the highest levels in Europe to the lowest. Similarly, we ought to ask whether we should make changes to a benefit system that provides little incentive or support for lone parents to return to work until their youngest child is 16 years old. Now let me make it clear, this is not an attack on single-parent families. But we must, I think, have regard to the fact that in most other European countries, the age at which parents are expected to look for work is considerably lower than the United Kingdom. And we should ask ourselves whether that might be more appropriate for Britain too. If it is not, then we should not change the policy. But we should certainly review the policy and ask ourselves hard questions about it. Is it the case that by maintaining the present system, we encourage dependency? Is it the case that with part-time work supported by working tax credit, we could encourage lone parents to return to work at an earlier stage? Is it the case that where a lone parent has a disabled child, additional help with caring responsibilities could be part of that encouragement to return to work? Is it the case that with proper childcare, lone parents could be encouraged to return to work early? The savings made from a reduction in benefit payments could be used to achieve that ambition. We talk a little about taxation and housing. There is much to be done to simplify benefits, to reduce effective tax rates and get real help to people such as those on incapacity benefit. But we must not think of poverty just in terms of the benefit system, or even just in terms of employment income. Housing costs make up 1/3 of the income of the poorest households. And these costs have rocketed over the last few years. The supply of affordable housing has not kept up with the demand for it. No wonder housing waiting lists have increased by 50% since 1997. Some 800,000 families in 1997, 1.5 million in 2006. You don't have to be an expert to know that children cannot thrive in homes which are overcrowded or in temporary accommodation. The failure to deliver on affordable housing has been a major failure of the last 10 years of this government. Greater priority has to be given to investment in affordable housing. All new private developments using the planning system should be conditional on satisfactory social housing provision. We know that many low-income households experience real fuel poverty. Children and families need their homes to be warm and comfortable. We will make that a priority. When it comes to tax, we cannot be satisfied that those in the lowest incomes still pay the highest share of their incomes in tax by comparison with those at the top end of the income scale. Progressive taxes, such as council tax, need replacing. And we have long argued for a fairer system of local taxation based on the ability to pay. A word about education and skills. Education has always been a key priority of the Liberal Democrats. A willingness, some will remember, to hypothecate taxation for that purpose in the past. And today we have added to that case for education. Because good education is essential for ending child poverty. It's the greatest gift we can give our children, allowing them to maximise their talents and to make the best of their own chances, whatever the circumstances of their families. Of course, there have been some improvements in our education system under Labour. And of course, our schools benefit from the hard work, professionalism of a dedicated teaching profession. But some stark realities remain. Too many children are not getting the right start in their early years. Too many pupils are leaving primary school without basic skills. And the worst examples are often to be found in the centre of the political heartlands of the Labour government. These schools need dynamic new leadership. And the best schools need to be given real incentives to take in the poorest and most underachieving children. Financial support in this country for the poorest pupils is fragmented, bureaucratic, and ineffective. We need to create a simple system where cash bonuses follow the most disadvantaged and lowest performing pupils. A substantial pupil premium would make needy children the focus of the school's attention, rather than the sometimes undesirable obligation that they are seen on too many occasions today. And the £2 billion currently spent on the Child Trust Fund, £2 billion, is unproductive and undesirable. It should be scrapped, and the money used to invest in early years education, which every expert will tell you is the education which has the greatest influence upon the achievement of the pupil. Now these policies, taken together, will help us to deliver our 2020 goals. So let me conclude by saying this. Some of the ideas I want our party to consider over the year ahead. I'm determined to take the fight for a fairer Britain into the mainstream of British politics. I'm determined to show that defeating poverty and increasing opportunity need not mean creating a state of dependency. I'm determined to show that Britain should not simply swap the days of calculated neglect under Mrs. Thatcher for benign neglect under her successors. I'm determined to show that there is an alternative to the dependency state of this present government. I'm determined to show that there's a sustainable way to remove the scourge of child poverty that does so much to undermine social cohesion. I'm determined to show that the way to do that is the Liberal Democrat.